Is it a sin to have sex on the Sabbath? This question is very sensational, and we are going to really dig and respond to this question. We're going to do this presentation in two parts. The first part will focus on the Old Testament perspective, whilst the second will be on the New Testament. And I implore you to share this message with the world, your friends, your church, and your family, and be a blessing to all of them. Kindly like this page and leave comments when you have something to share with us, and we will respond. We appreciate you so much for being a faithful member of Bible Talk Class. We begin with the first part, sex on Sabbath, a sin. We be guided by the following outline. What is the issue? Sex and defilement in the Old Testament. Brief meaning of Sabbath. Defilement of the Sabbath. When sex in marriage not permitted. Space for Israel's divine encounter. And conclusion. Now, what is the issue? Indeed, what is the issue? Generally, there is confusion regarding what can be and can't be done during Sabbath hours or seventh-day Sabbath hours. Sex is one of the confusing acts that a devout Adventist is worried about because the Sabbath is understood as God's holy day. Nothing unholy must be done during its hours. Though sex is not unholy, generally speaking, and biblically speaking, of course, depending on the context, it does not have any place during Sabbath hours because the Bible prohibits sexual intimacy when coming to the presence of God. This is the argument of those who think that sex cannot take place during Sabbath hours. Now, so the question we asked again is sex a sin when done on the Sabbath? Brief meaning of Sabbath. The seventh-day Sabbath marks the end of God's creation. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. This day is set apart from the preceding 6 days according to the creation account, hence holy. The day is holy simply means set apart. The day consists of evening to evening. That is the sixth day, the evening of the sixth day to the evening of the seventh day. The day is the Lord's day. It belongs to the Lord because the 6-day creation period is meant for human beings to conduct business for a living. This is what the Sabbath is about. It is the Lord's day because the 6 days are for human beings. The day, the Sabbath, requires cessation of routine work, business for a living, including the gathering of manna, cooking, the kindling of fire, and buying and selling. This is what we see in the Old Testament context, how the Sabbath was celebrated in terms of ceasing from one's routine work. Now, the day requires a holy convocation of God's people. In fact, we will talk about the kindling of fire on Sabbath, the cooking on Sabbath, the gathering of manna on Sabbath, buying and selling on Sabbath in another video. But for now, we are focusing on the meaning of the Sabbath briefly. So one can actually say that Sabbath observance comes down to two essential concepts. One is that it is a sign between God and the children of Israel forever. And for in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. And on the seventh day, he rested and was refreshed. So when the 7-day Sabbath is being ushered in, one has to appreciate and know that just as God rested from his creation of heavens and the earth, one has to cease from one's routine work that produces food or anything that one relies on for survival. And one has to rest so that one can be refreshed as God rested and was refreshed. So we imitate God in this regard. Second is that 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. The context here is simple, is that on the Sabbath day, those who recognize God as a creator, has been saved by him, will congregate, will meet. And once they meet, we call this meeting holy meeting, because you have ceased from doing any other work and you have accepted to meet together to recognize God as the creator and also as a redeemer. And that is what the Sabbath is about. It's about ceasing from your routine work and having a holy convocation or holy gathering to honor God. So the Sabbath observance comes down to these two essential concepts that we need to understand. Defilement of the Sabbath. What defiles the Sabbath, biblically speaking? Numbers chapter 13, verses 15 to 18 reads, "In those days I saw people in Judah treading winepress on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, What evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on our city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." And the word profane here comes from the Hebrew halal. You actually destroying the Sabbath. You are putting a dent on the Sabbath. You are defiling. You are treating the Sabbath as something ordinary. That's what profaning means in this context. And the word used here is halal. Look carefully as we move on. As we read Isaiah chapter 56, verse 2, the word says, "Blessed is the one who does this, the person who holds its fast, who keeps the Sabbath without desecrating," halal, the same word, "and keeps their hands from doing any evil." Okay, let's appreciate the text carefully. The same word is used. So we move on to the next passage, and that is very interesting. Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 to 14. I read, "If you will withdraw your foot from the Sabbath by not doing your pleasure," Hafez. Hafez simply means business. We'll read more about that. "By not doing your own pleasure, Hafez, on my holy day, but call the Sabbath a delight, oneg, the holy of the Lord, on it, and you honor it." How do you honor it? By not doing your ways, derek, the Hebrew. By not finding your pleasure, chafes, business. By not speaking a word, okay, speaking a word. Then you will take delight, onek, in the Lord. And I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. And I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob, your father. We'll focus on these words. Chafes, that is business, as you see here, and he will try to explain what that means. Some have understood this word to mean something different, something sensual, but we'll look at the text carefully. Now let's pay attention to Isaiah chapter 58 verse 3, the same chapter, okay? And here look at the lines, how the author wrote. It's important to understand the lines. It's poetic, and you can see first line, second line, third line, fourth line. We see how the lines help to understand the text in the verse, okay? Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Line 2. Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice? Remember this. Fasting, the word fasting, another word for fasting in the Bible is affliction, to afflict your body. Okay? During the Day of Atonement, one has to afflict one's body, and it simply means fasting, not eating. Okay? You are subjecting your body to some hardship. So, first line, second line are saying the same thing, but the author is using different words to communicate that. Now, let's look at the next line. That's the third line. In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure, chafes, okay, and exploit all your labors. You see the and here. The and here indicates that you find pleasure. These are the things that you do. You find pleasure and exploit all your labors. The third line here, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. It's a response to the question that has been asked in the first and the second lines. Of course, in fact, the first and the second line are saying the same thing using different words, and we call this kind of speaking as synonymous speaking or synonymous parallelism, where the author will use different words to express the same idea of the previous line. And so the third line is a response to the questions that have been asked in line 1 and line 2. Now, the text indicates that, in fact, in the day of your fast, this is what you do. You find pleasure, okay, and exploit all your labors. And so, third line and the fourth line, as you can see here, because you see the fourth line is a continuation of the third line. That's why the author uses here and here, okay, and here, meaning that find pleasure means that you actually do what you want. And what is author saying? The author is saying in the fourth line that you exploit all your labors. In other words, you work on the Sabbath. So pleasure simply here means work, business. You do your own things, and here the reference is your work, because the fourth line explains what pleasure means because of the relationship, how the lines are arranged. Okay, we call these lines synonymous parallelism, and that is important to note. So we are saying that Isaiah chapter 58 describes God's acceptable fast while denouncing Israel's possession of faith in him without obedience. Verses 13 to 14 state that defilement of the Sabbath consists in engaging in secular business, hefes, okay, on the Sabbath, or negotiating proposals, plans. The word here is dabar, plans, and that's what the context suggests. Therefore, both of which are their own ways. Okay, so when you are conducting business on the Sabbath or business proposal on the Sabbath, you are just doing your own things, your own ways. For these are incompatible with the Lord's ways, which they pretend to seek in verse 2 of Isaiah chapter 58. Even fasting, while seeking their own pleasure. While fasting, they do their own pleasure. That is, they oppress their workers. They continue to ask their workers to work whilst they are fasting. Hey, you work for me, I'm going to fast. And when you are fasting, you deny yourself of everything that gives you satisfaction. Everything. But they do these things. And so that's what the text is saying about defilement. So defilement of the Sabbath clearly is conducting business. Okay, business that gives you a living. Business that ensures that you continue to live, feeds you, gives food, or put food on the table for you. That is what the defilement of Sabbath basically means. On the Sabbath, one abandons oneself economically, for the Lord. This is what Sabbath means. At one level. Of course, we have said that there must be a holy convocation. But basically, Sabbath means that one has to abandon oneself economically for the Lord. When sex in marriage not permitted, the Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. We want to understand this passage because this passage has been used by many to say that you can't have sex on the Sabbath. But let's understand the passage. Verse 10. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes. 11. And be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Verse 12. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. Verse 13. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations. This incident is reported in Exodus chapter 19, verses 9 to 15. And here I use the New King James Version. Notes from this passage. Notes. Number one is that we see divine appearance to reaffirm the prophetic call of Moses to Israel. We must understand the purpose of the invitation, the purpose of God's appearance. Very important to underline the context. It's important, the purpose. Now, the period for consecration is 2 days before appearing before God. Okay, it's important to understand that. The period of consecration is 2 days. Okay? Now, the third item is that the consecration consists of washing clothes. This is what God told Moses. It's very clear there. Moses relayed the exact consequence of the consecration in verse 14, but added sexual abstinence in verse 15. So what God said exactly was that they should wash their clothes and prepare themselves. And Moses added verse 15, that is sexual abstinence. No specific day of the week for appearing before God was in view. That's very clear. The text doesn't say that God was going to appear on the first day or second day or third day or fifth day or sixth day, seventh day. There was nothing like that. There was nothing. So we don't associate this appearance of God with a particular day. That is not fair to the context. It's important to know that. No sacrifices were to be offered as a gesture of worship here. There was nothing like that. Just come before me and hear me speak to Moses to affirm my calling of Moses, that he indeed is my mouthpiece. That was the purpose of the invitation. You must understand that. Now, why Moses added sexual abstinence? It's important to understand the broader context. Okay? Haramai, the Stoic philosopher, in his narration of the Egyptian priest, who once said that when also the time arrived in which they were to perform something pertaining to the sacred rites of religion, they spent some days in preparatory ceremonies, some indeed 42, but others a greater, and 118, others a less number of days, yet never less than 7 days. And during this time they abstained from all animals, and likewise from all pot herbs and leguminous substances, and above all from a venereal connection with women, for they never at any time had connection with males. They likewise washed themselves with cold water thrice every day, vis-a-vis when they rose from their bed before dinner and when they betook themselves to sleep. This test is about how the Egyptian priests conducted themselves anytime they had some encounter or perform some sacred rites, okay, to their gods. So Moses was very much aware, and this is not the only incident we have coming to us from the from the time of Moses' ministry. Surrounding cultures then had the same understanding that anytime you plan to approach a deity, you had to really abstain from certain things, and one of them is sexual intercourse. And that is why Moses introduced this to them, that they should not defile themselves by having sex with women, or men having sex with men. So that's a cultural practice, and Moses adopted that to really make sure that people will not defile themselves. It wasn't strange. It wasn't strange because later on we see that God Himself affirming this kind of prohibition, or this kind of teaching, that men and women, anytime they have sex, they should remain in their rooms till evening and wash themselves with water, and after that they become clean after evening. So it was a common practice then, and Moses was adopting or using what was known at the time when it comes to approaching a deity. So this is why Moses added the sexual abstinence part to the command of God. Now, when you look at this text, it's important. When you read Leviticus chapter 15, verse 18, it says that also when a woman lies with a man and there is an emission of semen, they shall bathe in water and be unclean until evening. So this is the confirmation of God, to what Moses added in Exodus text that we have just read. Now, it's very interesting to note that having sexual intercourse and touching holy things are things that one have to appreciate when it comes to the law of uncleanness. For example, we read 1 Samuel chapter 21 verses 4 to 5. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. David replied, Indeed, women have been kept from us. As usual, whenever I set out, the men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? And so it's very clear that if you had sex with a woman, you could not even go to the temple, as we see in the next verse. You could not do that. You have to separate yourself and find yourself in a place, wash yourself, with water, and stay there till evening. After evening, then you would become clean. Let's note these festivals that God instituted. In fact, God instituted other Sabbaths, not only the seventh-day Sabbath that crowned the creation week. When God instituted other Sabbaths in festivals that He had established, He instructed that no work should be done or carried out on these Sabbaths, as we see from the passages referenced here. It is only on the Sabbath, that's the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, which was a Sabbath or a rest day, that the people had to deny, that is fasting, themselves. Okay? Only on this day, the Day of Atonement, which was a Sabbath, a rest day, that God instructed that people had to deny themselves, that is fasting. The law of uncleanness presumes that a couple cannot have sex on any of the Sabbaths because all the people are required to be present at the holy convocation. This was the institution of God. And the implication here is that if you have sex with your wife and you become unclean, you have to stay in your room. And of course, you wash yourself and stay in your room till evening, meaning that you can't be part of the holy convocation. And you are supposed to be part. So one can assume here that because of the need to be part of this holy convocation, one has to abstain from sexual intercourse during the Sabbath hours. And here we're talking about all the Sabbaths, or not only the 7-day Sabbath, all the Sabbaths, because of the holy convocation. The law of uncleanness was necessary because, according to Leviticus chapter 15, verse 31, it says, "Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle that is among them." That is among them. It is very important to underline this word, my tabernacle. Okay, my tabernacle. So, and we have other, things that once one finds oneself, in doing those things, or one is affected by those things, one becomes unclean, and one could not approach the tabernacle. It is important. Let's remember this. Remember that all temporal defilement, and we have several forms of defilement. Okay, one, sexual intercourse could bring defilement. Menstruation could bring defilement. Childbearing. In fact, when you read Leviticus chapter 12, verses 1 to 8, it's made clear that once a woman gives birth to a son, the woman becomes unclean for 7 days. If the woman gives birth to a girl, she becomes unclean for 2 weeks, double. And then if the woman gives birth to a son, the woman will need 33 days to purify herself. If she gives birth to a girl, she will need 66 days to purify herself. So, meaning that that woman has to, quarantine herself for that period, and that woman, could not participate in, holy convocation or join any holy gathering. Okay, it's natural. There's nothing you can do about that. Nocturnal discharge of men. Men sleeping and they wake up, they see that their semen actually has, been discharged. And also touching of the dead body. If somebody dies, you touch the body, you become unclean. If you touch a human bone, you become unclean. If you go to the cemetery and you touch the grave of a dead person, or animal, whatever, you become unclean. Okay? And so what this means is that if you're unclean, for whatever period that you remain unclean, you are prevented from partaking of holy convocation. The reason is that the tabernacle is there. And why is the tabernacle so important? Because the physical presence of God is in the tabernacle. So in short, we see that the physical presence of God required ceremonial cleanliness for certain natures induced uncleanness. It is not that you decide to do this. It is natural for human beings to die, natural for human beings to bury the dead. It's natural for human beings to menstruate. Here, women, okay, men also to have discharge at night. You don't decide to do that. Sex also, you have the urge to do that as married couple. You are free to do that. It's natural to have sex. It's natural to touch the dead body. It's natural to menstruate and to give birth. And when any of these things happens, and because God's presence is there, physical presence is there, one has to quarantine oneself, and has to undergo some ritual cleansing to make sure that one is clean before one can participate in holy convocation or to go to the tabernacle and offer sacrifices. Okay, let's look at a space for Israel's divine encounter. In the Old Testament, the phrase "before the Lord" occurs not less than 2,000 times, and it either refers to an act done in the physical, symbolic, or omnipresence. What we are saying here is that we need to understand the space. In other words, a place where God could meet people. Because where he met people was considered as holy because he was there. Holy in the sense that this is for me, this space is mine, this space is mine. So if you are coming to my space, I expect you to look like this. And so one phrase that is very common in the Old Testament is before the Lord. And there are several uses. Okay, and one is that it denotes the idea that one comes before the physical presence of God or symbolic presence of God, or just that anywhere one finds oneself, one will see or understand that one is before God. The people of Israel, for example, saw the pillar of cloud at the tent of meeting and inquired of the Lord and worshipped. They saw the pillar of cloud, meaning that that pillar symbolized the presence of God, and therefore they bowed and they worshipped. God designated space for Israel to present their offerings in recognition of his presence among them. And here we are referring to the tabernacle or the sanctuary, that this is where you must come and present your offerings, because I will be in that sanctuary. In the Old Testament covenantal relationship, God prescribed certain rituals to regulate cleanliness as long as he lived among them. He made sure that there were some rituals that one can embrace to really ensure cleanness, cleansing the body of defilement. So because he was there with them physically, he had to put these things in place. It's important to underline that. So irrespective of space, wherever, the presence of God required bodily cleanliness, whether the mountain, in the tabernacle, in the military camp, anywhere God determined to be his place of abode or his presence, that space required bodily cleanliness. That's what God actually determined in the Old Testament. Therefore, God's determination of his presence in each space required bodily cleanliness. That is the point we want to underline. Conclusion of the first part. A few points have to be noted. 1. The 7-day Sabbath of the creation week required 2 items. A. Cessation from business activity, supporting livelihood. B. Participating in a holy convocation or meeting to recognize God as the Creator and Redeemer. Now, the second point that has to be appreciated is that holy convocation requires those who are ritually clean from nocturnal emission, discharge, sexual intercourse, menstruation, childbearing, touching a dead body, human bone, or grave to attend. The point is very clear that once you are ritually unclean, you can't mingle, you can't approach the tabernacle, because the text has made it clear. Leviticus chapter 15 verse 31, that anyone with any form of uncleanness should not approach my tabernacle and defile the tabernacle, because I am in there. Several festivals required holy convocation. So it wasn't only the 7-day Sabbath of the Christian week that required holy convocation. There were other Sabbaths or other festivals that also had other Sabbaths or rest days. Any defiled person could not mingle with other people nor approach the tabernacle to make any offerings. This is from the text of the Bible. God's presence required ceremonial cleanness, whether on the mountain, sanctuary, or military camp, irrespective of the day. A day is not the issue here. The issue is the presence of God. So it is the presence of God in a particular space and on a particular day that matters. Therefore, sexual intercourse, like any other nature-induced uncleanness, is not a sinful act, though it requires ritual cleanness to not defile the tabernacle of God. And it is not the day in which it is done that causes defilement, but because of the physical presence of God.
We believe you've understood our presentation today. Thank you very much for being a partner of Bible Talk class. Let's move on to the second session. The second session, we're going to explore how Sabbath was celebrated in the New Testament and the space of divine encounter, and also what caused defilement of the Sabbath in the New Testament period. Then we conclude the presentation. Thank you very much and stay tuned.
Sit down on my throne, bright crowns are in